Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about controversial online influencer Andrew Tate, who was recently arrested in Romania under suspicion of human trafficking and being part of an organized crime group. Tate and his brother are currently being detained by Romanian authorities while they are investigated. Andrew Tate is a former kickboxer who rose to internet fame by promoting a, quote, an ultra-masculine, ultra-luxurious lifestyle in various clips and interviews that have been shared widely on social media. He gives a lot of self-help advice, and he's also made a lot of money with his website Hustlers University, a subscription-based service that claims to help subscribers get rich quick. Now, I call Andrew Tate controversial because while there are a lot of people who are outraged about a lot of the things he says, there are also a lot of people, particularly younger men, who think there is a lot of value in his message. And this might be surprising to hear. For instance, Andrew Tate openly calls himself a misogynist and a sexist, and argues men should have authority over the women in their lives, statements which have caused him to be banned from several social media websites. These statements, coupled with his recent human trafficking arrest, might cause someone unfamiliar with Andrew Tate to wonder what exactly it is that his fans see in him. I asked on Twitter for anyone who is either a fan of Andrew Tate or knows a fan of Andrew Tate to message me with an explanation of what it is they like about him or his content. And I got hundreds of responses in tweets and emails from people answering me. So let me share my findings with you after reading all of those replies. Firstly, a lot of the time on social media, Andrew Tate is being deliberately exaggerated and playing a bit of a character. And the majority of the people watching his content seem to understand that. They get that he's being deliberately over the top. He says controversial things on purpose to chase social media engagement, and most of the people who watch his content seem open to excusing some of the worst things he says using that justification. And the idea that Andrew Tate is just playing a character is something his lawyer has already been putting out there to defend him in his recent legal troubles. Because unfortunately for Andrew Tate's lawyer, Andrew Tate keeps admitting to crimes on camera. So his defense is the same one that other over-the-top controversial media figures use when they get into legal trouble. They say Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson have both used this line of argument. We re so ridiculous, we re so outlandish, we re so unreasonable that nobody watching could possibly believe anything we say. And indeed, most of the people who watch Andrew Tate's content seem to understand this and don't believe everything he says. But I know from reading all those responses on Twitter that there is also that minority of fans who do take everything he says seriously. They totally believe in the character. These are the people who are signing up to Hustlers University and sending Andrew Tate their money. You know, this is the less savvy minority who you can trick into thinking the best way for them to make money is to send you all of their money. But regardless of how much someone believes in Andrew Tate's messaging, what is it he's saying that young men are connecting with in the first place? Well, if you watch a few popular clips of Andrew Tate, you will see him tell an anecdote that I think is a good representation of why his message appeals to certain young men today. He talks about being a younger man himself and for the first time realizing just how vast the gulf is between regular people and the ultra-rich. So, as a young, poor man, Andrew Tate was thinking about buying a car and was absolutely amazed to see a Ferrari being sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds. This stunned the young Andrew Tate. He was broke, but there were people out there who could afford to spend all that money just on a car. He was struggling to get by at the bottom of the ladder, but there were people at the top of the ladder who got to do whatever they want, spending huge sums of money on unnecessary indulgences like fancy cars. He was blown away by the disparity in wealth, and he resolved to not spend the rest of his life as a peasant. He was going to make himself into a more successful man, climb that ladder by himself, and one day he'd be rich. And to a lot of broke men in the same position as the young Andrew Tate at the start of his story, you can see why this would be appealing, right? He was in your position too, but now he's rich. So maybe if you listen to him and do the things he tells you he did, you will also be able to afford a Ferrari one day. Now, regardless of the conclusions drawn here, there is truth in the foundation. You know, a real problem with the world has been identified. And this is what draws young men in initially. If you agree with Andrew Tate's assessment of society being unfair, if you connect with some of his self-help advice, then you might be willing to listen to some of his more controversial ideas. And the most common controversy for Andrew Tate is misogyny. As I mentioned, Andrew Tate openly describes himself as a misogynist and a sexist, and is repeatedly argued in favor of a patriarchal worldview. So let's talk about the idea of patriarchy. Now, I'm going to talk very broadly here, but typically patriarchy has been the norm throughout a lot of human history. We've had kingdoms and empires and religions overwhelmingly headed by men, emphasizing the importance of the male line, men being considered the head of the household, with women often not having the same rights as men under law, or even just being considered property. Men have historically ranked above women in most power structures, is the point. Now, I'm going to say something relatively cruel, kind of an uncomfortable truth that I need to be careful about expressing. For dudes who just suck, like they are not particularly interesting, or funny, or kind, or successful, for men who just don't have much to offer a woman, well, they used to be able to offer an income. They could at least be providers at a time when it was more difficult for a woman to provide for herself. However, with the advancement of women's rights in a lot of places over the last century, with women being able to go into higher education and work a wider range of jobs, gaining the ability to divorce husbands they don't like and so on, as well as it becoming increasingly acceptable to be unmarried later in life, there's simply less financial and social pressure on women to settle for men who just aren't very good. And there's something related to consider here, too. What men are able to provide financially on one income isn't what it once was. We still live in the aftermath of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the economy has not been doing too great for the average person, to put it lightly. Average wages have been relatively stagnant for decades in a lot of places. The ultra-rich control a larger and larger proportion of the world's resources. Most of the people watching this video will live in societies which are increasingly unequal. So for those men who only have resources to bring to the table when seeking a partner, what they are providing is on average both less necessary and smaller in value than it once might have been. This is all a recipe for creating a group of lonely, aggrieved, and desperate men who feel unable to meet the expectations that society has for them. And the reason I said I need to be careful in talking about this is because this set of circumstances can prime this group of lonely, aggrieved, and desperate men to fall for two ideologies in particular that I consider to be very harmful. One is the incel path. Men who believe they are supposedly of irredeemably low value in today's quote, and so they blame things beyond their control. They claim nothing can be done, and they sink into despair. The other ideology is the reactionary conservative route. People who argue we should hit reverse on social progress and take society back to a time where women were in their rightful place. These are related sets of ideas because they both see woman as something deserved by men. Women aren't really people in these world views. They read just another object a man can own to signal his status to other men, like a big house or a fancy car. This group of men are also very easy prey for grifters. Andrew Tate's projection of wealth and superficial signifiers of success can appeal to lonely and economically anxious men. If you listen to me and sign up for Pyramid Scheme University, you too can have a massive house and 10 sports cars and 20 girlfriends or whatever else. Now this might seem silly, and it is, but we reliving in a world where even the sort of success enjoyed by the previous couple of generations is a ridiculous pipe dream for a lot of young people. You know, one regular house and one regular car and one singular girlfriend seem out of reach for a lot of young men. And if you are going to believe in a pipe dream, why not shoot for the moon, you know? This is something a lot of adults don't get about Andrew Tate and people like him, because let's be honest, to most even moderately well-adjusted adults today, Andrew Tate looks very silly indeed. He's like a cartoon character of a pompous rich guy bragging about his money and expensive cars. You know, it's ridiculous behavior that signals to his fellow adults insecurity and immaturity. And as I mentioned earlier, even a lot of his fans aren't really taking him seriously all the time. They understand he is being deliberately provocative and exaggerated. But his target audience isn't those moderately well-adjusted adults who think he's silly. It's not the people who can tell when he's joking or being deliberately provocative. It's the few people who can't. It's the people who take him seriously. This is a point made very well by Bombergoe when describing Alex Jones in a video I'll link below, but it applies equally well here, so we will shamelessly steal it. Andrew Tate being over the top and ridiculous doesn't hurt him in reaching his target audience. It actually acts as a filter. If you can tell he's unserious, well, you're not going to be sending him money anyway. But if you take him seriously, if you believe what he's saying, even when he's being as ridiculous as possible, then you just might be gullible enough to sign up for Hustlers University. Those people are the real target audience. Any relatively mature adult knows not to fall for get-rich-quick schemes that promise huge returns for no investment. And the Hustlers University website literally promises to teach you how to get returns for zero investment. But so what? We re not after them. We re after the immature, the inexperienced, the people who don't know that this is rubbish. This is part of the reason for Tate's popularity with young men in particular, because one group of immature and inexperienced people is obviously teenagers. Teenagers are insecure and immature and inexperienced, and often don't have much that they can call their own. And, of course, they wouldn't. That's not an insult. That's just what it's like being a teenager. And to be fair to teenage boys, understanding how they should act as men can be confusing. You will often hear from the right wing that masculinity is in crisis today. But it isn't, really. What is in crisis is patriarchy. Patriarchy is being eroded over time. Conservatives simply equate patriarchy with masculinity. Those words mean the same thing to them. But the social changes we've talked about today are moving society away from patriarchy. But this transition is leading to some confusion in younger men, because during the transition, they rehearing contradictory messages all the time. Younger generations are raised by older generations, after all, and their older attitudes to social issues can be passed down. Media from previous generations still exists and reflects the attitudes of the time it was made, and a lot of it still influences modern media. So, very broadly, we have two messages that young men are hearing as they are growing up. One is that everybody is fundamentally equal. Women should be treated with respect. They should show kindness and understanding and empathy to everyone, right? The other message young men are hearing is that they need to be, quote, real men patriarch alpha males, and women are their lessers who should be put in their place and made subservient. There was some discourse on Twitter lately about what the left can do to appeal to young men, with one tweet in particular claiming that men flock to the right because the left gives, quote, brain-dead advice to young men. Now, I disagree with this opinion, firstly because I think it's overly simplistic. Young men today are not neutrally considering different ideologies and picking the one that gives the best advice or has the most attractive branding or whatever. The truth is that these ideologies are offering completely different, incomparable things. What the right wing is offering is patriarchy and all its promises, backed up by an entire human history's worth of traditions and stories and myths. Follow us, act as we tell you to act, and you will be a real man, the top of the pyramid above everyone else, and women, in particular, will have to do what you say. Now, the left, in turn, offers equality, nobody being inherently better than anyone else. But what that means in practice for a lot of young men is that women do not have to do what they say. They can say no to you. They don't need your resources to survive. To attract a mate, you can't rely on being simply necessary anymore. Now you have to be desirable, and that can feel like a much more vulnerable, emotional position to be in. This is more than an issue of advice or branding or so on. It is, in fact, one of the major political divides. Actually, the single most important political question you could be asked, in my opinion, do you think some groups of people are inherently superior to other groups of people? Now, the right can offer easy affirmations to young white men here. They can say, yes, you are better than other people. You do deserve to be on top. Follow us, and we'll make sure that's where you are. Now, the left has a much harder job. They don't have those easy affirmations. What they re-saying to young men is that you are not inherently superior to anyone else. Everyone, including you, should be equal. Now, on the surface, that is a much harder sell. But admittedly, the left can make a mistake here, and that mistake is accepting the right's claim that life will be better for young, in particular, white men under patriarchy. I've seen some on the left claim that these men are unreachable, because of course they aren't going to want to give up their privilege and live worse lives because of it. Patriarchy is beneficial to these men, is the claim, so they are never going to want to give it up. But the truth here is that patriarchy is not good for men. At the very least, it is not good for the vast majority of men. Now, I'm far from the first person to make this observation, of course. I'd advise reading The Will to Change by Bell Hooks if you want to see someone making this point much better than I can. But yes, the truth here, on that should be utilized as much as possible by the left, is that patriarchy punishes men far more often than it rewards them. The things that patriarchy promises to men are lies, and men have far more to gain in rejecting patriarchy than accepting it. So let's explore that, and we'll start off by talking about the concept of masculinity and traditional masculine values. Now, different people will have different ideas about what exactly counts as a traditional masculine value, of course, but typically you will hear words like strength, leadership, confidence, independence, and things like that. And the first point I'd like to make about all these traits is that they were, by themselves, morally and ethically neutral. Take a man who is strong, for instance. He can use that strength to work hard and provide for his family, or he can use that strength to abuse and dominate his family and make them fearful of him. Leadership, obviously, is automatically a virtue. We can all imagine an incompetent political leader, for instance. Confidence can be misplaced and easily turn into arrogance, and so on. These words don't really tell us anything about the worth of a person by themselves. What matters is how those qualities are used and expressed. The next point I'd like to make here is that these particular values and the way they are both expressed and considered by others are relative over time. As an example, the modern West derives many of its founding ideas about philosophy, science, art, law, politics, and so on from classical Greek culture, but many places in ancient Greece had very different ideas to us about what counts as traditionally manly behavior. My favorite example here is the accounts of the sacred band of Thebes, the elite fighting force of the Theban army, which was made up of 150 pairs of male lovers. And honestly, I can see an argument here. What's more masculine than a bunch of tough warrior dudes loving each other with no women in sight? Right. Even something as simple as pink being associated with baby girls and blue with baby boys changes over time. Bill, 100 years ago in the United States, these colors were reversed, for instance. But people can still place a disproportionate amount of importance on these completely arbitrary gendered signifiers. For instance, I remember me sister once causing a bit of a stir among the older members of me family for daring to put her infant son in a pink car seat, as if by merely touching something pink colored, her son would be forever tainted by it. You know, he'll clearly grow up to be feminine or gay or whatever just because one time he sat in a pink chair. And I'd like to talk for a bit about that sort of masculine insecurity, particularly fears about men appearing feminine or homosexual. And as a fictional example here, let me tell you about my favorite scene from The Sopranos. So, The Sopranos is a crime drama show focused on mafia boss Tony Soprano. It's an interesting show to consider in relation to the topic of masculinity, as Tony often struggles with the expectations of the highly traditionalist and patriarchal criminal world he inhabits. So, minor spoilers for The Sopranos for this next part. In the scene I want to talk about, Tony is talking to his therapist, Dr. Melfi, about the fact that one of his mafia subordinates, Vito, has been outed as homosexual. Tony is pretty stressed out. Vito is one of his best guys, he says, but his other criminal associates aren't going to want to work with a gay man. Melfi asks Tony how he personally feels about homosexuality, and he immediately says he thinks it's disgusting, an opinion which would be expected and unquestioned in a room full of his male peers. But as Tony continues to talk and tries to defend this position, he starts to contradict himself. He complains that every TV show these days is rubbing his nose in homosexuality by including gay characters, but then he admits that he likes to show the word with Jennifer Beals. He points out that he's a strict Catholic, even though he's a murderer, an adulterer, and various other things that make that defense very silly. When Melfi points out that many of Tony's associates will have had sex with men in prison, he says they, quote, get a pass for that on account of there being no women in prison, to which Melfi replies sarcastically, well, that's nice. Tony is quick to point out to Melfi that he didn't engage in homosexual behavior when he was incarcerated. He's worried that she will question his masculinity, and when she obviously doesn't care either way, he accuses her of thinking he's lying. Tony is worried about accusations of homosexuality, and Melfi's refusal to judge him or consider him less of a man is a challenge to his patriarchal worldview. That she wouldn't think any less of him if he were gay actually annoys him, funnily enough. My favorite part of this scene is when Tony runs out of steam trying to justify his homophobia. He gives up trying. Away from the judgment of his male peers, talking to a woman who will not consider him less of a man for saying so, Tony finally admits that he doesn't really care if Vito is gay. It doesn't really bother him. He can't actually defend his initial display of disgust. However, when Dr. Melfi salutes Tony's new outlook, he responds, "It's a tall fucking order, I will tell you that." And he's right. You know, it's all well and good for Tony to be accepting of gay people here in his therapist's office, but back out there in his day-to-day life, Tony is expected to be and act homophobic. If he does and act like he finds homosexuality disgusting, other men will judge him and question his masculinity and his heterosexuality, and maybe even get violent with him. Even though Tony is not actually homophobic when he sits and thinks about it, he's still expected to, in a sense, perform homophobia for his male peers in order to signal his own masculinity to them. Now, obviously, the response Tony might face as the head of an organized crime family is probably a bit more dramatic than for the average person, but even if it does always start a mob war or whatever, men can still face social repercussions for refusing to act in a way that reinforces traditional notions of patriarchal masculinity. Now, regardless of what he thinks, Tony Soprano is still homophobic in his actions. I think it's important to say, and he actually ends up ordering V to be killed, something he doesn't actually want to do, but ends up feeling that he has to do because it's expected of him. My point here is that Tony is the boss, the patriarch, the alpha male, but instead of that bringing him freedom, he finds instead that his behavior is tightly restrained, controlled by a patriarchal social system and its expectations of him. Patriarchy makes him miserable, it makes him insecure, and it makes him do things that he doesn't actually want to do. So I have 2 points to make about patriarchy here. The first is that patriarchy, more often than not, steals the qualities it expects men to exhibit. It demands confidence and self-assurance, but really it will make you insecure and afraid, afraid of appearing weak or feminine, and worried about not being considered enough of a real man. Any confidence patriarchy can give you will be a false front propped up by insecurities. The second point I want to make is that, funnily enough, a challenging or breaking with patriarchy often requires you to exhibit those very same qualities that patriarchy would expect of you. It can take courage and confidence and strength to challenge norms or break with tradition, and someone can go along with tradition not because they actually want to, but out of cowardice and fear and weakness. So what's actually more important here? Adhering to a particular set of traditional masculine norms, a particular look or set of social behaviors, or is it actually embodying qualities like courage and confidence and leadership, even if doing so means breaking with those traditional norms? As another example in fiction, let's look at Billy Elliot. So Billy Elliot is a movie about a young boy who discovers he really likes ballet dancing, a traditionally feminine activity, and he insists upon practicing ballet even though it causes the men in his family to get angry with him and question his masculinity. But Billy keeps on doing it because it's what he wants to do, and he's good at it. So we can ask, who is actually being more manly in this story? And it really depends on what we mean by manly. If we're only talking about the way people present themselves and the sorts of traditionally gendered activities they engage in, Billy isn't being very manly at all by ballet dancing. On the other hand, Billy is the one with the courage and confidence to stand up to his older male relatives, to do what he wants to do, whereas they are being controlled by fear. Fear of how people will react to Billy dancing, how it will make him look, and how it will make them look in turn. I guess I'm taking a long time to say, what's more important, the way you present yourself, the way other men perceive you, or the way you actually are? There's a scene in Game of Thrones I like, where King Joffrey is being a cruel little wonker, as usual, causing his uncle Tyrion to insult him, again as usual, to which Joffrey gets incredibly angry and shouts, "I am thy king." Joffrey then gets put in his place by Tywin, the real power in the room, who rebukes Joffrey by saying, "Any man who must say I am thy king is no true king." I get reminded of this scene whenever I see a quote alpha male influencer yelling about their own manliness and insisting other people recognize it. Not that I believe in the whole alpha male thing, of course, but they do, and if they really were alpha males as they understand it, they wouldn't need to shout about it, would they? They just would be. If that's really how people worked, how they naturally related to each other, then they wouldn't need to shout about it. We've spent a lot of time talking about negative expressions of masculine stereotypes today, so let's move on to have a think about the concept of positive masculinity. So I asked on Twitter what people think of when they hear the phrase positive masculinity, and I got a lot of responses. Most people who responded did so with either a picture or a name of a good man, usually a historical figure or celebrity they admire, or a character from fiction who is a man with many positive traits. I got a lot of characters from video games and comic books and animated shows, and a lot of Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Just so much Aragorn. The people really love Aragorn, it turns out. And when I first read through the replies to this tweet, I was confused. I asked about positive masculinity, and a lot of people just sent me pictures of good men. You know, aren't they misunderstanding the homework assignment here? There has to be more to the idea of positive masculinity than just being a man who is good, right? Or does there? Let's have a think about it. So when I think of positive masculinity, I think first of my dad. My dad is a typical man's man. He's traditionally masculine in a lot of ways. He's big and strong. He works a traditionally masculine job. A traditionally man He's a truck driver. He likes having a pint with the lads down the pub and watching the football, all that sort of thing. And I have no memories of me childhood where I saw my dad engaging in any traditionally feminine hobbies or pastimes. It was all sports and poker and action movies. And my dad likes and values those aspects of himself. And since I know he watches me videos, I'm certain he'll be agreeing very happily with this description of himself. Anyway, all we redoing so far is describing a traditionally masculine man. The thing that actually makes me father an example of positive masculinity to me is that he's never insisted other people have to agree with or accept his notions of gendered behaviors. I have no memories of him trying to force me to be a particular type of man, nor me sister a particular type of woman. If I ever wanted to play with traditionally feminine toys, for example, or if me sister wanted to dress in more traditionally masculine clothes, he was happy to support that. He never insisted that certain toys were only for girls, or only boys wear those particular clothes, or so on. Now, this permissive outlook is maybe unusual for a man of his generation. Although, even though he's my dad, I don't want to be too flattering here, so I'll say he can still be a stubborn old git in a lot of typically masculine ways. You know, he's reluctant to accept help when he needs it. He doesn't like to express his emotions and all that. But still, whatever the concepts of masculinity or femininity mean to him, it's always seemed like it was a personal opinion, only that he never tried to force other people to adhere to. And this was a common theme in most of the examples of positive masculinity people sent me on Twitter. Whether fictional or real, people sent me examples of men who do not force a particular type of masculinity on others. They themselves might be very traditionally masculine or not at all, but whatever they are themselves, they are confident and content enough in themselves to exist alongside other ways of being. This would be the core of a positive masculinity to me. You can possess all those typically masculine descriptors, but not use them to control others. You know, you can have strength without using it to dominate. You can offer protection without needing to claim ownership. You can lead without demanding others follow you. Positive masculinity is to me a masculinity that doesn't lay sole claim to its descriptors, that recognizes abstract concepts like strength and leadership do not belong exclusively to masculinity, especially not to just one particular type of masculinity. So, this all sounds nice, doesn't it? What if we had all of the good parts, but without any of the bad parts? It is easier said than done, isn't it? But you might be wondering here, what does masculinity mean, really, if we don't insist that any of the adjectives we use to describe it are exclusive to it? Or indeed, what does femininity mean for the same reason? What does femininity for the If a woman is strong, say, is that woman exhibiting a traditionally masculine trait, or is it an example of feminine strength? Or if a man is compassionate, say, is he exhibiting a traditionally feminine trait, or is it an example of masculine compassion? Maybe it can be both, or maybe it doesn't have to be either. You might ask why we bother to gender these behaviors at all if anyone can exhibit the traits. I personally like to think of the gender aspect as more of a flavoring than a strictly necessary ingredient. You know, if you re a man, and you re trying to be a good man, you should first try to be a good person, and being a good man will follow on from that. You should you three to fire you pio 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 go you go you go you go you no. You know, if all you worry about is the man part, you're just gonna come across as insecure. I feel like I should wrap up today by giving some actual advice to young men. Why not? Right. It can't hurt. So, not to brag, but I am a generally happy and relatively successful 34-year-old man, and here's all the best advice I can think of that I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Firstly, if you value yourself by the acquisition of things, you are never going to be satisfied, because there's always more things. If you give someone who values themselves like this 10 fancy sports cars, you know what they re gonna want, right? 11 fancy sports cars. A lack of money can make you miserable, but an excess of money is not going to make you happy. Next, you don't actually want a fancy sports car. Trust me. If someone hands you a mega expensive supercar, you should sell it immediately and buy something that can go over a speed bump without cracking in half. Or, like a bicycle. They re not real cars, these things. They re expensive ornaments that you have to pay to maintain. That to buy If you actually get one, most people are just gonna assume that you're recompensating for something. On self-improvement, if you re going to improve yourself, you are going to improve yourself. Anyone on the internet who is selling some indispensable method to make you successful and happy and rich is lying to you. Also, if it were that easy to get rich quick, nobody would be poor. Only one person is guaranteed to get rich in those sorts of schemes, and it's the person running the scheme. And it's the running that is it power offenses. Here, there, the seas, here, there, The person most likely to get rich in a gold rush is the guy selling the shovels. There's usually two parts to these sorts of scams, right? The part where you can get rich doing it, which never lasts very long because then people find out about it and it stops working because a ton of people try to do it at once. After that, the only way to get rich with it is to sell the scam on to other people and say, look, I got rich doing this, so can you, even though it doesn't work anymore. If it still worked, they wouldn't be telling you about it. And if you're rehearing about it, especially from a source that looks like an advertisement, it's too late. You really won't being scammed now. Next, if you're going to improve yourself, you should do it for you. Because you are a person too. You matter. You should respect and value yourself. And should and value yourself and value or so or don't try to make yourself into something you think other people will want. Make yourself into something you want to be. If you focus on that, you will be happier, you will be more confident, and everything else will follow. So let's talk about women. Now, if you re a young man attracted to women, you were probably more than a little curious about what women want, right? And if you want to know what women want, you know who you should listen to. That's right, it's other single men on the internet. No, it's not. It's women. Because women are people, they are individuals. They have inner lives and thoughts and feelings just the same as you. They can tell you what they want, but it's on you to listen to what they say. There are plenty of women out there who are desperately lonely for a man to treat them, but they surrounded by dudes who only treat them like characters in a dating sim, trying to speedrun their clothes off by using the right ratio of pickup lines to nags or whatever else. In my experience, what women are most attracted to is when someone shows an actual interest in getting to know them as people. Next, not to be mean, but for young men in particular, most women you meet around your age and older will be onto your shit. If you re not genuine, they'll know. If you re just pretending to be nice to get sex from them, you'll be spotted immediately, trust me. And I know this is going to be a knock to the ego of a lot of young men. It certainly was for me when I was younger, but there are women out there who are just savvier than you are. They are beyond your ability to manipulate, and they've been reading you like a book. And I know it's hard if you rehearing this for the first time. I'm not joking. It was a real blow for me when I first realized I wasn't as smooth as I thought I was. But don't worry, you can change your behavior and find something genuine. Not only should you not try to manipulate women, because it's wrong, of course, but you don't have to manipulate women. They read just other people, not aliens, and by and large, they want the same things that you want already. Also, if you re lonely, focus on meeting people in general, not just people you want to have sex with. Sex won't make you any less lonely just by itself. In fact, just by itself, it will probably make you more lonely. Making connections with other people is the important thing there. I know it's easy for me to say, don't focus so much on the sex part, but it is true. It's very easy to try too hard in that department. Not many women are going to like it if they sense that you feel entitled to sex. Next, women aren't a hive mind, but they do talk to each other, and one of the things they are going to talk to each other about is you. People are going to discuss you when you are not in the room. If you re a creepy weirdo to one woman, she's going to tell the other woman she knows that you re a creepy weirdo. On the other hand, if you re nice, if you re friendly or do some act of kindness without expecting anything in return, that's what people will be saying about you instead. So do kind things, not just because it's the right thing to do, but for the sake of your own reputation. And this idea, you will hear people say that women don't like nice guys and only respond to men who treat them mean. That's a load of rubbish, trust me. What you all find is that one thing many people are attracted to is confidence. And you can be a confident jerk, yes, but you can be a kind person and confident too. If you go from being a shut-in who never interacts with women to a confident jerk who does interact with women, yes, you will meet more women. Whoa, but the jerk part is not necessary there, is it? And I'll give one final bit of advice today. Don't take life advice from people like Andrew Tate, not just because he used to get kicked in the head for a living, and not just because he's currently covered in lice and cockroaches in a jail cell, and not just because he's an admitted rapist. Well, actually, yes. Don't listen to him for all those reasons, but also don't listen to him because he's wrong. At the start of the video, I talked about the anecdote of the young Andrew Tate realizing that society is unfair, that there are a tiny minority of rich people hoarding a vast majority of the world's wealth. Now, he looked at this unfair exploitative system and he said, I'm going to climb up it by myself so I can buy a car. This is a small, selfish, and cowardly way to look at the world. When he realized society was unfair, he didn't set out to change it to make it more fair. He set out to take advantage of the unfairness, to be a rich man exploiting poor men, instead of a poor man being exploited by the rich. And he got rich partly, by swindling money out of men who are in the same low position he was when he was broke. Is this what real men are supposed to do? Say, I'm gonna get mine, regardless of what I have to do to get there. I don't care how silly I make myself look. I don't care who I have to exploit. I will have a Ferrari one day. I can't imagine a more miserable outlook, I don't think. And for any of his fans who've stuck around to the end of the video today, can you honestly still tell me, with a straight face, that choosing to live like he does has made Andrew Tate happy? Anyway, thanks a lot for watching today, folks. And as always, thank you especially to all me supporters over on Patreon, some of whom should be scrolling by right now. Patrons get early access to all me videos, as well as access to a few of me old unlisted videos that I took down because I don't like them anymore. How's that for a sales pitch? Head to Patreon at the link below, join up, and you can view all of the worst things we ever made. Anyway, that's all from me today, folks. I'll see you next time.